After much procrastinating, I finally finished Tales from the Pizzaplex number 3, Somnophobia. If you want to see my video on that story specifically, it's around here somewhere. Hi, I'm Nervous, and today we are going to be talking about pressure and Cleithrophobia and the overarching themes of self-sacrifice and navigating peer pressure. Some of these themes even carry over from our first story, Somnophobia. Now, before we continue, I just want to say I do provide summaries of these stories for people who haven't read them in a while or at all, but you are more than welcome to skip past them. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to become a part of the Nervous system, and turn on bell notifications to be notified when I upload or go live. Without further ado, let's get analyzing. Now, I am going to be talking about these two stories out of their official order, partially because Cleithrophobia is easier to summarize, and partially because I just have more to say about pressure in general. This story starts with a group of kids exploring and enjoying their time at the Pizzaplex. They notice an attraction listed in the index that doesn't actually exist, themed around Ballora and fitness. We then flash back 5 months to when Grady, an employee in his late 20s, is arguing with another employee, Tate, about whether or not they're going to finish their safety checks tonight or tomorrow morning. Grady doesn't want to come back in the morning because he has plans, and Tate doesn't want to stay later because he has plans tonight. Protocol says no one can be left alone at the Pizzaplex, but neither will budge on their decision, and Grady is left alone since Tate is the ride of the only other employee in the building. Once by himself, Grady notes that the security system and internal computers have been on the fritz before doing the rest of his inspections. The last on his list is Ballora's Fitness and Flex, an attraction that requires users to squeeze through tubes that get thinner as you descend. Grady is uneasy about this task as he has a fear of being trapped in small places, Cleithrophobia, after an incident in his childhood where his babysitter's boyfriend locked him in a linen closet for over 6 hours. Grady was determined, however, to inspect this ride, as anything faulty in it could lead to a small child getting trapped the way he had been, and he wanted to prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, Grady was unable to fit through all of the tubes, and when stuck, a Ballora animatronic would appear to help, aka pull on his limbs until he squeezed through the tube. Grady did not want Ballora's help again after experiencing how painful it was being pulled through the pipe, but she showed up anyway the next time he got stuck. This time pulling his arms until they dislocated and eventually broke. She kept pulling and pulling regardless of how much he told her to go away. The other 2 employees returned later to find Grady hanging from the tube, and despite the evidence that he may still be alive, they choose to believe that he's dead, or just that he wouldn't want their help, too afraid of getting in trouble for leaving him alone. He hears enough to understand what's happening, and is unable to speak and let them know that he is alive. He watches them leave as Ballora continues pulling on his mangled body. Now first, I just gotta get this out of the way. Upon reading this story closely for like a 3rd time, I am certain that the Ballora animatronic does not have legs, making this cover art for the graphic novel even more egregious than it already was. I just have to put that out there. And the fact that the internal network was straight up dumping employee records is very suspicious. Like it's giving Vanny, you know what I'm saying? Details like that help us understand the kind of environment these employees were in, as well as the likelihood of folks going missing without a trace. Beyond that, this story is an interesting one because it's a realization of one's fear through facing it. Whereas in some of these tales and fright stories, you can see a sort of careful what you wish for or taking something too far kind of narrative, or even allowing a fear to consume you. Grady seems to do everything right. He doesn't shirk his work responsibilities, he knows how to separate work and pleasure by not wanting to compromise his day off for his coworkers' sake, he doesn't give in to them, and he doesn't let his fear keep him from inspecting the attraction. He doesn't even seem particularly ungrateful or anything. His crime, so to speak, is being someone who eats a lot of junk food as a result of being allowed to use food as a coping mechanism as a child, and that's what makes him too big to fit through the tubes in the attraction. It's a bit of a bizarre moral if there is meant to be one. But don't think the simplicity of this story kept me from reading his backstory and thinking, hey, wasn't the crying child once locked in a small place for a long time? Crying child, or Dave, or Cassidy, whatever you believe his name to be at this point, was actually locked in places more than once, it would seem, by his brother, who was similarly meant to be watching him. Now, frankly, I'm not sure what conclusions, if any, could be drawn from that, but to further explore the themes of this story, we need to talk about the other one. Luca is a 17-year-old boy hanging out with his friends at the Pizzaplex at an attraction wherein you are presented with different urban legends surrounding Freddy's. Luca believes the stories did happen, and this attraction only exists to make light of the events and put their truth into question. Luca's friends think he's wrong about that and want to play the scenario The Green-Eared Killer, about teens breaking into Fazbear Frights. Luca wants to play a security guard and help people, but his friends insist he play Springtrap. Luca is morally very against this and fights back against his friends for a long while. He doesn't want to play dress up as a child killer and is unsettled that his friends don't understand and just respect his boundaries. What he doesn't tell them is that when he was younger, he lost someone who was like a little brother to him to a kidnapping and killing. A 4-year-old named Kenny, who Luca enjoyed taking under his wing, so to speak. He'd been so devastated by what happened that he would have recurring nightmares of Kenny calling out for help and Luca being unable to save him. Luca ends up giving into the peer pressure and puts on the Springtrap costume, which looks old and grimy and smells vile. He also notes that there is a metal skeleton on the inside of the suit as he puts it on. Just before starting their game, he notices 3 kids wearing Freddy, Chica, and Foxy costumes being watched by an employee named Earl, who Luca finds creepy and unsettling. The game begins, and Luca chases the others throughout the play area, which he remarks is surprisingly detailed and realistic. At one point, he gets jump scared, and his sudden movement causes something to clamp down on his leg. He's bleeding, but his friends keep running away from him so he can't get their attention to tell them. In fact, they try to attack him and play a Balloon Boy sound to distract him, both which make him activate more spring locks in the suit that pierce his hips and ribs. It becomes clear that this is an actual spring lock suit, not a simple costume. Luca tries to take off the suit, but every attempt causes him more pain. He needs to tell his friends he needs help, but when he tries to yell for them, the words come out as gargles, and they think he's just trying to sound scary. He eventually ends up backstage, thinking back on memories of his dad telling him about peer pressure. The game time ends, but Luca's friends don't go looking for him. They exit the attraction, assuming that he'll catch up. Luca only realizes this when he notices a new game has started, and that's when he understands that his friends aren't coming to help him. Luca sees that Earl is in the game too, wearing a cheaply made Springtrap costume, and Luca gets the feeling that he is up to no good. And despite the intense pain he's feeling, he uses his last breaths to hunt him down. He finds him holding one of the children who is trying to get away. Earl looks at Luca confused, and the child is able to escape. Then Luca lunges at the man and begins strangling him. Eventually, Earl stops fighting back and stops breathing. And as Luca dies, he feels relief that his inner compass was working and that his last act had been his own. Now, I find find a number of themes throughout the third installment of Tales really worth noting. First, all 3 stories involve a scenario where the main character dies a gruesome and slow death. Sam getting his face eaten off by a dog while being trapped in the dream sphere and unable to move, Luca by Springlock, and Grady slowly bleeding out after having his body mangled by Ballora and the tubes. All the stories also involve some level of peer pressure, though no amount of giving in or not seemed to have an effect on the fate of our protagonists. Furthermore, both Pressure and Cleithrophobia feature our main character making a sacrifice to help others. Grady faces his fear of being trapped to keep kids safe, and ultimately it works, even though it spells his end. Grady dying meant the ride never opened for kids to use. And while we don't find out whether Earl was grabbing kids as a part of the game scenario or because he really was a creep or a kidnapper, Luca used his final moments not to try to find help for himself, but to save the kids from what he saw as a threat. Moving into Pressure specifically, this story gave me a lot to think about. First, I thought of how if you believe these stories are in the game's timeline, this means that the original Springtrap suit somehow made its way to the Pizzaplex, or there was more than one suit. Warning, I am about to share my initial thoughts exactly after reading the story and ruminating a bit on what different things could mean for the franchise. These thoughts are not peer-reviewed, nor have they undergone rigorous fact-checking and validation via other pieces of evidence that exist within this franchise. If you have anything that disproves the things that I'm about to say, feel free to leave them in the comments, but please just be cool about it. I'm inclined to believe that the suit survived the Fazbear Frights fire and was one of the items sold at auction, and that Scrap Trap is literally that. The remains of Afton using scraps to create a semblance of the suit he once wore. Another important call-out is that there are roleplay scenarios for seemingly all of the rumors surrounding Fazbear Entertainment, including the hauntings of the original Freddy gang and the puppet. There is even a costume for Golden Freddy in the costume room. Again, assuming the Tales books and games are connected, some of these props, however authentic or not, could be related to the Tangle. I can only imagine finding 2 dead bodies in the attraction would see the whole thing scrapped, especially upon realizing one of them died in a Springlock suit. This would mean a whole costume closet full of old Fazbear character masks and costumes would have been shoved away and moved out of sight. Of course, alternatively, there's always the possibility that this is just a story and it isn't connected to the game's timeline at all. With that bit out of the way, it's time for my favorite thing to do on this channel, draw parallels to the original FNAF characters and story. Now, can you guess who I think Luca, the character connected to a clingy little brother-adjacent kid who coincidentally died at a young age, represents? A character who then has nightmares about not being able to save the boy? The one who wants to play a security guard but ends up in the costume associated with William Afton, and who chooses to die in an act of self-sacrifice? If you guessed Elizabeth Afton, what? No, why would you? It's Michael. He has connections to Michael. Yep. Right down to having 3 friends who are just kinda the worst. PSA, if your friends refuse to respect your boundaries, then those are not your friends, period. But back to the Luca-Michael parallel. I really appreciate the way the story Pressure made me think about Michael, because there has been some speculation by some theorists who I do genuinely respect, but also respectfully disagree with, regarding Michael Afton being the vengeful spirit. Their evidence, as compelling as it is, always felt off to me, and this story really helped me understand exactly why. Michael, being the vengeful spirit, is supposed to be narratively satisfying, but I think this story paints a different picture. One about a boy tormented by things he couldn't change, who saw the reality of William Afton's actions and believed them to be deplorable, and wanted terribly to do the right thing. Someone who gave into the pressure of his father, despite knowing he was being asked to do something against his own morals. A man who was pushed to the brink of death and chose the final moments of his life to ensure the safety of even one more child.
To you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be.
And I believe in those final moments, he felt at peace, because his final action was his own. I don't believe Michael was vengeful. I believe he was a tortured soul. The children haunting the suits sought peace because of how they died, and Michael sought peace because of how he lived. I really do believe Michael's soul moved on with the FNAF 6 fire because he got to stay in the building and watch, making sure his father burned with the others and that it would finally be over. Do you think any of these stories have nods to past events, or am I just seeing things that aren't there? Let me know in the comments. And to be clear, I don't believe these stories are evidence or should be used as evidence of anything solid, but reading them helps me solidify my feelings about other theories, as well as just what I believe and why. Luca's actions were extreme and violent, but they were more about how Luca saw himself and acting on his own heart to be a protector rather than out of some need to punish someone he saw as an aggressor. I can't know that Andrea Wagner was thinking about Michael while writing this story, or that she was directed to allude to that particular moral dilemma by Scott Cawthon, but my brain naturally went there while reading, and it helped me realize that it's absolutely narratively satisfying, and in fact, in my opinion, more narratively satisfying as an ending for someone to achieve peace through how they choose to die. Oh my God, phrasing. I should have said how they chose to spend their final moments, not how they choose to die. Oh my God. Oh my God. Life is worth living, and I'm sorry for my poor phrasing. But I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you're wondering about the epilogues, I've decided to talk about all of them in one video at the end so I can analyze the entire story at once. And if you did like the video, YouTube has a button for that. There's also a button for subscribing, which will make you a part of the nervous system. You can financially support the channel for $1 a month, and you can turn on bell notifications to be theoretically notified when I upload or go live. I make videos every week and I stream on Wednesdays and Fridays, but if you can't wait, there are videos on the screen right now just for you. Okay, bye! It's absolutely narrative satisfying. Forget it. Whatever.